worship today.
Come on in.
Come on in. Welcome. I'm so glad to be able to be with you today, and I wish I could see your face the way you can see mine. But we're going to worship together. If you checked your church email, you'll know that the devotion for this week is there as a hard copy, and you can check on it or download it and follow along, or just sit back and listen and join me as we worship together. So I invite you to enter the story, to enter the place that you belong, not just looking on from the side. For this is your story. So join me and enter the story. This past week has been a difficult one as we have learned about the spread of COVID-19 around the world and hearing about the deaths that have resulted. I learned myself this past week that a friend has been exposed and is now in total isolation from her family. Have you received that kind of news too? It's unsettling. Our journey through Lent has brought us to a heartbreaking story of saying goodbye to friends. So this week takes us to that last night that Jesus spent with his disciples. It was the Passover feast, a time of celebrating deliverance and freedom from slavery in Egypt. But as the evening unfolded, there was so much more going on. Let's look at the story in the Gospel of John, the 13th chapter. Hear these words. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. And then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with a towel that was tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" And Jesus answered, "You do not know now what I am doing, but later you will understand." And then Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." But Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." And so Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said, "One who was bathed does not need to wash, because except for the feet, but is entirely clean. And you are clean enough, although not all of you." For Jesus knew who was to betray him, and for that reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." And after he had washed their feet, had put on his robe, and had returned to the table, he said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example, that you also should do as I have done to you. For very truly I tell you, servants are not greater than their master, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them." May God bless the reading and the hearing of this word. Jesus' words at the Last Supper were shocking to those who were gathered in that upper room. His words can seem familiar and even comforting to us when we hear them as we gather for communion. But at that moment of their utterance that night in the upper room, they were anything but usual. this week, as we enter the scene of that Last Supper, just long enough to get a grasp of the shock that would have rippled through his friends. A Lord washing the feet like a servant, unbelievable. But Jesus knew his time was up, and it was time for the disciples to finally get the message, even if it came in a shocking way. Love one another as I have loved you, by serving and forgiving and freeing and communing or becoming one with God. As we entered the picture this morning, we find Jesus and his followers gathering for a meal. Listen now to the one witness who tells the story. My master's banquet hall upstairs was booked for that night, and the time had arrived for the evening meal, and they had come to the banquet. All was prepared according to their Lord's wishes, and I was ready with the water basin, as I always am. Years ago, my parents had given me to the owner of this inn as collateral for a debt they owed him. But things did not go well for them, and the debt was never paid. So I work now still to pay it off. Roman law says that that someday I could be freed, but I will never again have the full rights in society like those who had never been a slave. It's a mark for my whole life. I keep my head down and do what the master asks, because legally he has the right to punish me, to abuse and humiliate me. I've witnessed it happen to others. Right now, I have no rights. So there I was, with the bowl in my hands, just waiting for the go-ahead to start. Now, it would have been the honored guest that I would wash first, and I knew which one that was because he was seated at the head of the table. This was all protocol, because everyone has a place according to status. And when he showed up, I recognized him right away and remembered all the stories that I had heard about this teacher. He was saying things that were really upsetting to those who heard it, for those who were invested in the system of status. Saying things like, the last shall be first. My friend who serves in the kitchen finally had to tell me to stop staring at him. I just couldn't imagine the world like he described. And then he came right up to me and took the basin of water from my hands. He took my servant's towel and wrapped it around his waist, and he knelt, telling Peter to sit down. This was going to be no ordinary night, and I realized that my life, my view of myself, and my status in this world and in my life was never, ever going to be the same again. Now, washing other people's feet may seem shocking to us, even now, but more out of a disdain for feet rather than the real reason it was shocking to those disciples. Jesus' stature as the master teacher and honored guest at the meal made him first in line to be served. Certainly not to be the servant. And later that night, after they had left that upper room and they were outside in the garden, Jesus said to them, I'm giving you a new commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You must love one another. This is how everyone will know that you are my disciples, when you love each other. As we live these days of sheltering in place, I would like each one of you to think about this. In what ways can you show love for Jesus? How can we, as we are isolated from one another, show our love for others just from where we are sheltered? As we come now to a time of prayer, I want you to be able to think about the people that you know that need to be prayed for. To pray especially for those who serve us by being in grocery stores and other stores, at gas stations, at post offices. Certainly for all the people who are medical personnel, doctors and nurses and therapists and all kinds of other people. And for the people that you know that maybe have tested positive, for loved ones who are fragile in their health, and all the people around this world, because there are 148 countries full of people who are in the same position of sheltering and being locked down like we are. So here is a prayer for such a time as this. Sometimes we just aren't paying attention. We can keep our heads in the sand when we really need to attend to difficult situations or the needs of your people, O God. And we come now and ask you to forgive us. In these difficult days, guard us from distancing ourselves and help us to care for what's right in front of us. You entered our story through Jesus. And now we ask that you would help us to enter fully into the story of your kingdom on this earth as it is in heaven, in this difficult time of pandemic. Amen. Know this for sure. Our lives contain continual opportunities to be humble servants to our friends and family and to strangers. You are forgiven. You are freed, encouraged and loved by a God who wants you to live fully. Thank you for being here this morning or at this time for worshiping. And know that you can reach out to me through email or through a phone call and hear these words of final benediction. They come from the book of Numbers. When Moses receives from God a blessing he was to pass on to Aaron, his brother and priest, to share and bless the people of Israel as they wandered through the desert toward the promised land. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. And above all, may the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you lasting peace. Amen.